but Judaism is certainly not kind of fundamentally committed to the idea of the Torah as a kind of stern pedagogue that keeps you in check. That definitely is not the fundamental or most important understanding of the Torah within Judaism. It's the understanding of the Torah in Judaism is that it's an expression of God's love, that God wants to have a relationship with human beings.
Hello and welcome to It Means What It Means, the podcast in which a guy with some college and a day job has long-form conversations about biblical texts. This is the third week in a row that I'm going to strongly encourage you to buy the book that's being discussed today. Next week I won't be discussing a book, and that's the only reason that I won't be doing that. But if you are a Christian of any variety or denomination, I think it is important for you to learn more about what Judaism is on its own terms. And this book and this conversation are a really good way to begin that introduction and begin that education. So I was happy to do it. And I hope this is not the last. It's certainly not the first that I've had on here. Conversation about Judaism, trying to hear about it from a representative of Judaism rather than reconstructing it through a Christian lens. So if you have any feedback, your opinion on the podcast, guest suggestions, or maybe you want me to change the direction of the podcast, send that my way at itmeanswhatitmeans@gmail.com. All one word, itmeanswhatitmeans@gmail.com. Now, here is my conversation with Tzvi Novick. Take care. Enjoy. Tzvi Novick, welcome to the podcast.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Before we get going, will you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I am a professor at the University of Notre Dame. I teach in the Department of Theology there. My research focus is ancient Judaism, early rabbinic literature, liturgical poetry of Judaism in late antiquity. And I also do a lot of teaching at the undergraduate level about Judaism generally, about Christianity and Judaism. And I've written a book that comes out of that teaching.
And that book is Judaism, A Guide for Christians. And so Erdman's reached out and they were like, hey, would you be interested in this? And I'm like, absolutely. But as I started to look at the book, I'm like, have you ever come across a thing that at first you're like, does this make sense? And then you realize, oh no, this makes all the sense in the world. He teaches at Notre Dame part was the part that I was like, huh? And then like, well, of course, a professor, who is himself Jewish, who teaches at Notre Dame would come in contact with, or really any Christian school would come in contact with a lot of reason to need to write a book like this. So
yeah.
If just as a jumping off point, what is the story of how you decided to write this book?
Well, so as I said, it came out of the teaching. I didn't kind of come in. I've been at Notre Dame now for quite a while, really since 2008, but I didn't come in with any particularly intimate familiarity with Christianity as a living religion. I mean, except to the degree that one picks that up inevitably by being in America. I did have a pretty good familiarity with the New Testament and with early Christianity as part of my sort of historical study of Judaism. The New Testament is part of that landscape. But certainly the experience of being at Notre Dame and teaching a student body that is largely Christian and teaching about Christianity and Judaism is ultimately what led me to this. And I suppose what I came to appreciate relatively quickly was that there were kind of two things that it seemed to me was important for Christians approaching Judaism to be thinking about. One was how their tradition, how Christianity has conceptualized Judaism and Jews in the past, how that has changed over time, what it's like now. That's one. And then the other is a kind of knowledge of Judaism itself, and thinking about how Jewish religious practices, how Jewish kind of theological commitments compare to Christian ones. And so I ended up then kind of teaching a course that put those together, and I didn't really see a book that was putting the two of those things together, a kind of one-stop shop and a kind of an attempt to think about those two topics synergistically. So that's really where this book enters.
So I think the best entry point, because I prefer positive assertions over what isn't it,
Yeah,
is okay. So if we talk about 2025 right now,
yeah.
what is the best way to describe, um, I guess, the broad category of what Judaism is to begin with that?
Hmm. Hmm.
I,
Yeah. Okay.
is that?
Sure.
Well,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't want
Yeah.
to say let's go all the way back to the beginning because you don't have all
Right.
day.
Right. Yeah. Well, okay. No, that's a great way of kind of getting into the topic. Um, yeah. Well, if you think about Judaism today, we're mainly thinking about two two locations. We're mainly thinking about North America, first and foremost, the U.S. and the state of Israel. The I don't know what percent of it, but it's very high in terms of the total percentage of worldwide uh, Jews worldwide who live in those two countries. Those are the two centers of Jewish life today, with much smaller but important centers in places like Argentina, England, France, um, Australia, an assortment of other countries. But we're talking about uh, those two countries mainly, are America and Israel, and yeah, and we're talking about, on the American scene, we're talking about a Jewish community that largely originates ultimately in Eastern Europe, coming over in the turn of the 19th century, late 19th, early 20th centuries, and so is Ashkenazi, indicating its origins in Eastern Europe, divided into denominations ranging from more traditional, like the ultra-Orthodox, to the less traditional, Reform, Instructionist. And then in Israel, we've got some of that because we have plenty of Israeli Jews who come from that same context and emigrated to either um, Ottoman or British Mandatory Palestine, and then to the state of Israel. And then we also have a very large population of Jews who are coming from really kind of rather different backgrounds, coming from places like um, uh, Egypt, Syria, Iraq, Iran, um, other places in North Africa. And these are Sephardic or Mizrahi Eastern Jews. They experienced modernity differently, so they didn't have that same kind of fragmentation into denominations that you saw with the confrontation between traditional religion and modernity in Europe. And Israel is kind of composed half and half, I would say, of those two populations. So yeah, that's the very, very general lay of the land, but just at the kind of the demographic and very basic kind of level. Then, of course, there are all the details.
So I think what's telling about that, and I said this, before we started recording, I don't want to spend the entire interview saying, well, in Christian terms that, but what's interesting to me about that is you're talking about people, and whereas if I had asked you, if you were an expert on Christianity, and I had asked you, tell me what
Hmm.
is Christianity, you would begin to talk about belief, and you would go
Hmm.
into, well, there's this, and there's the Orthodox and Catholic, and then in the Protestant, and so the distinction between uh, being Jewish, like you are a human being who is Jewish, and
Hmm.
being religious, they're not necessarily the same thing 100% of the time, correct?
Hmm. I'm sorry. The question, the distinction between being Jewish and between
Being an adherent to Judaism.
yes, right. Yeah, absolutely, right. So, right, and that's a great point. That's a great kind of observation. That right, if we're talking about being Jewish, then my answer was, I guess, uh, in the first instance about the Jewish people. Right. So Judaism really is distinguished by this really um, by the fact that the Jewish people constitute a central theological category in Judaism. Um, and so, um, yeah, one can think of Judaism even as in one sense, the religion of an extended family. That's one way of putting it. And so, uh, yeah, so at the so then one always kind of needs to speak about Judaism and the Jewish people together. Of course, there are many Jews who, yeah, as you implied, are don't identify as Jewish religiously. They identify as Jewish only in ethnic terms, in the same way that someone might identify as ethnically Irish or Icelandic, and that might come with some colorings of religion, insofar as religion has become manifest in the general culture. But it doesn't necessarily come with a set of beliefs, and it might not even come with a set of practices either. Um, so yeah, but from the perspective of Judaism as a religion, the Jewish people is this one of these kind of central theological categories.
How would it be best to describe an adherent of Judaism, a participant of Judaism? Like,
Hmm.
what is the best language to describe someone who? And I'm asking you for that language to
Yeah,
then try
yeah,
to use that
maybe,
language.
yeah. Maybe in general parlance, one speaks of religious Jews and secular Jews. Sometimes, right, people tend to think of religious Jew by default as an Orthodox Jew, kind of in those most traditional forms. But if we're speaking about I think the broader term would be the more accurate one, where right there are religious Jews and they could come in um, Orthodox or conservative or Reform varieties, depending on denomination, or if we're speaking about Jews kind of coming from that Eastern context, North Africa, Near East, then they might be more or less traditional, but not really divided into denominations. But broadly, we can speak of religious Jews, and then there's a substantial percentage of the Jewish population, Jewish in ethnic terms, that would identify as secular.
And and is that a? I mean, I imagine the farther back you go in history, the less likely it is that you would find someone to
Hmm.
identify with what we consider as secular. And
Right.
fair enough, that's just a question of antiquity.
Yeah.
But so I think what I'm trying to bridge, because I have supersessionism in the back of my brain, and
Okay.
the thing that, like, aside from it being so harmful and damaging and having all of these second and third order effects throughout,
Hmm.
especially European history, but just
Yeah.
the history that has followed Jewish people, or even in some cases preceded them, that it's kind of predicated on an idea that isn't true, and that is like reading Christianity, what developed of Christianity, back into Judaism. Is that fair to
Hmm.
say?
Right. Well, so if we're thinking about, I mean, I guess I would understand supersessionism, the term that you used just now, and you can tell me whether you're understanding it the same way, is this the notion that with the coming of Christ and Israel's rejection of Christ, or perhaps just with the coming of Christ, even without Israel's rejection of Christ, um, the Jewish people kind of cease to exist as a relevant theological category. God's relationship with the Jewish people comes to an end, and it is and the place of the Jewish people is taken, is supplanted, is superseded by the new people of God, that is to say, the church. So yeah, that's how I take supersessionism, and then right, the question is, if we're asking whether that's correct or not, then I mean I guess it's important to ask what are our criteria for correctness. If we're asking whether that corresponds to the intentions of the gospel writers or the intentions of Paul, then yes, I think it's quite fair to say that is incorrect. Yeah.
It just seems it was always an implicit thing, and I grew up in a Christian Zionist theological tradition in
Hmm.
premillennial dispensationalism, but there was
Yeah.
always this kind of quiet part, uh, just foundational to our theology, that somehow the theology of the Hebrew Bible and of the time of Jesus was essentially, about dying and going to heaven, which is
Hmm.
what we were concerned with, really, dying and going to heaven. And then, my study in New Testament biblical studies and then ultimately Hebrew Bible biblical studies just showed me like this is not relevant. Like this kind of bedrock thing that I was taught, that coming to faith and believing in Jesus is just like a better and updated version of what Jewish people were trying to do in what we called the Old Testament. And
Hmm.
and so the supersessionist idea seems to be at least somewhat predicated on that. But just your initial off the top of your head description of, well, here's what Judaism is, it doesn't line up with that at all.
You mean because it's because I wasn't kind of referencing the afterlife, or where, yeah, well, where did you see kind of the? I'm curious where you saw the gap. Or
Well, it seems like there's a concern for these people. So I think you have to do a little bit more digging than to just say, like, if you believe all the right things happen.
yes, yes, no, well, that's certainly fair to say, right? That is not. Yeah, I mean the Judaism as it emerges from the Hebrew Bible, from Tanakh, from Ikra, according to the interpretation of the rabbis of late antiquity who kind of offer what becomes the sort of canonical interpretation of the Bible for almost all forms of Judaism today. So yeah, that's not. It would be misleading, I guess, to characterize it as kind of centrally interested in the question of how an individual attains to salvation or gets to the afterlife. There is for sure the afterlife is an important category in traditional Judaism, um, and so there certainly is an interest in the world to come, one's portion in the world to come, to use the terminology that traditional rabbinic Judaism uses. But you'd be missing a lot. You'd be missing very, very central things if you put that at the center and ignored everything else.
Can you go into more of the world to come from a Jewish
Um,
perspective?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think so. I mean, the world to come is all over traditional rabbinic literature, right? This canon of texts from late antiquity that that interprets the Hebrew Bible. Um, so yeah, there's a famous passage, for example, from the Mishnah, this kind of foundational text of rabbinic law, the earliest text of rabbinic literature, that states all Israel has a portion in the world to come, and these are those who don't. Right? There are certain ones who don't, and there's a complicated textual history about that passage. But in any case, that's certainly how the passage has been received throughout the ages. Um, but that's just one example of hundreds or thousands that could be given. So yeah, there is this the afterlife is a given. It's understood that one of the purposes of the commandments, or one of the things achieved by the commandments, by observance of the commandments, is merit, merit in the world to come. And there are all sorts of metaphors that are used to express this. It can be even expressed in terms of um, kind of acquiring principal and kind of living off the interest, or in this life, with the principal paid back in the next. So the point is that the afterlife is a major commitment of traditional Judaism. It gets complicated in modernity when scientific thinking leads some to skepticism about this. Historical thinking leads one to concerns. Well, why doesn't the afterlife figure in the Hebrew Bible? Why does the Hebrew Bible have so little to say about that? But that all being said, uh, uh, the uh, the main interest in the observance of the law and the commandments in rabbinic Judaism, I think it's fair to say, is how to live well in this world. And there is this assumption that the commandments of God represent, um, well, they represent an expression of God's will. So to observe the commandments is to be a servant of God, which is the best way to live in this world. the commandments of God aren't just a manifestation of God's will, but are also a manifestation of divine wisdom. And so to understand those commandments, to appreciate the wisdom therein, to adhere to those commandments is the way to produce um, to live well in the world. Where living well in the world isn't just a matter of one's individual happiness, but it's a the Torah kind of describes a way of life of the people. So it's a matter of collective existence at the level of family, community, and nation.
Sorry, I kind of have two thoughts in my head about
Yeah,
what thread I
please,
want to
yeah,
follow there. So I'll grab at this one. So
yeah,
rabbinic Judaism being the dominant form of Judaism in the world today, is that fair to say?
yeah, almost the exclusive one, but there are some minor exceptions.
So how far back do they go? Because I think, well, one, like when I was younger, I don't think I got much of an education on what the history of Judaism was. And as I started to kind of learn things, I'm realizing now um, there are scholars who are doing some work that I think are clarifying how Judaism developed that has been helpful to me, add some dimensions to the picture that I have. But when do rabbis become a central part of what we know as Judaism?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we don't get named people with a title rabbi until well around the time of Jesus, right? And Jesus himself can be characterized that way. And um, uh, and the the earliest people who are recognized as rabbis who have the title of rabbis come within this tradition that we call Judaism or Rabbinic Judaism are from the say the second half of the first century of the Common Era, and then the these rabbis produce this canon of works, this collection of works over the course of roughly the first 6 centuries of the Common Era. And they do kind of cite figures who seem to have had affiliations with the group known as the Pharisees from the New Testament and other sources. And so we can trace a kind of prehistory of what we can call the rabbinic movement in back to the Second Temple period, to the last couple of centuries of the Second Temple period. I mean, there are broader continuities, of course, tracing all the way back to the earliest biblical periods, but that's when we can think about something recognizably rabbinic. So proto-rabbinic kind of ways of thinking in the Pharisees, perhaps, and then the rabbis in the first 6 centuries or so of the Common Era. And yeah, and then, but that's when their literature kind of is produced and coalesces, and then it seems right that they gradually over that period, and then for a couple of centuries beyond, they come to be recognized as the authoritative interpreters of Judaism and achieve this kind of hegemony in terms of their, what constitutes Judaism is the Judaism as the rabbis understand it, and then a sign of their kind of ascendancy or of their having arrived is that in the around 800, 900 or so of the Common Era, we have the emergence of opponents, right, who kind of push back on them. The Karaites are is the group into which these kinds of opponents coalesce. Karaites from the word mikra, scripture, kind of scripturalists who reject rabbinic authority. But and they're an important force in this period and throughout the medieval period in certain ways. And there remains some Karaites today, some Karaite Jewish communities today in Israel and elsewhere. Uh, but um, but we can speak of the rabbis of Judaism having become rabbinic Judaism for the most part by the seventh, eighth, ninth centuries. It's tough to say for sure, but I would say yeah, it's a gradual process. Could well be earlier than that, but tough to trace in detail.
I'm glad you brought up the Karaites because I was
Yeah.
blanking on it, and I
Ah.
wanted to. So now, like I told you, I'm going to start putting the video on Patreon. I
Yeah.
noticed I was editing a video and I was looking up because I was searching a Kindle edition of a book for something, and it looks really rude. So I did not. I was blanking on that, and I interviewed Nick Posgay, and he was talking about the Cairo Geniza and
Yeah.
that we see evidence of the debate between rabbinic and Karaite Judaism in there. So that's what I was trying to dig in
Hmm.
my brain.
Yeah.
So thank you for
That's
that.
right. Yeah,
But
that's
it's
right.
interesting that you bring up the Pharisees. So
Yeah.
their relevance to Christianity is also very important. They're represented in the Gospels,
Yeah.
and I we're finding out now maybe they weren't the bad guy from people who are studying around the New Testament and the development
Hmm.
of early Christianity that maybe they weren't the bad guys that we thought, that we inherited,
Yeah.
at least for modern Protestant Christianity, kind of Martin Luther's personal anxieties and his animosity for medieval Christianity that was aimed at Pharisees and other Second Temple Jews, but law. So that's where that was the other thread. I'm glad I picked the thread because what you said kind of led me into. Uh,
Yeah.
so I've asked this of a couple of people, and
Hmm.
I've gotten pretty interesting answers. So I'm going to throw this your way. Is
Okay.
law the best way to understand what Torah is?
Hmm. Yeah, it is a great question. It is a common translation of it. Um, I think probably. I mean, there are certain things that rendering kind of does well, and other things that it does less well. I think uh, by translating as law, it gives, I think, a good sense of the seriousness with which it's treated, and particularly the idea of the seriousness of the observance of the commandments. And I think this is something that I very often find in just interacting um, with Christians or other non-Jews when I talk about the Sabbath, and the idea that on the Sabbath I'm not going to be able um, to um, to use the phone or to be able to answer emails. And I think it's tough to appreciate that. I mean, what I mean by that is that I cannot answer an email. That it's illegal, right? And I don't I don't do, or at least I try consciously not to do illegal things. I yeah, just try to steer clear of any um, breaking of the law. Certainly don't do it intentionally. Yeah, and so I think of it with that force, or even more, but certainly with that kind of force of it simply actually being not allowed, right? And so I think the translation law gives some sense of the seriousness of it, that it's not a practice, it's not a tradition, it is the law. Uh, on the other hand. Right. The law, yeah, I think law, we tend, I mean, unless we're kind of lawyers and thinking deeply about the meaning of law and the idea of devoting a career to law, not merely, I guess, for the sake of making money, but out of a sense that law matters. Unless we're in that space, I think we tend to think of law, as something we need to observe, but as a constraint, and so in that sense, it's misleading because I mean Torah is constraining, right? I mean, and yeah, like laws, but it's not only constraining, and it's not constraining in the first instance. It is, yeah, the condition of possibility of engagement with God. Uh, it's a language for which to uh, express, give expression to fundamental theological values, to wrestle with them. It's a system that enables human beings uh, to really think with God about how to realize Judaism in the world through legal interpretation, right? So, I mean, the Supreme Court justices have the great privilege of being able to kind of think through fundamental questions about what it means to what our constitutional commitments mean to us as Americans. Well, we have that privilege, in studying the law in Judaism to really kind of think through what does this text mean and how do I negotiate its relationship to other texts, and to what extent to what extent is it embodying these value commitments that I seem to have? To what extent is it challenging them and forcing me to wrestle with it? So yeah, so yeah, I guess that's my first attempt at an answer.
So, and this is kind of woven in that answer, but if you could put a
Mhm.
fine point on it,
Mhm.
what does Torah observance yield?
What does Torah observance yield? That's a really interesting question. So, I mean, again, it yields a lot of things at many levels. And I don't want to discount that kind of aspect of afterlife and merit. That's a very traditional concept in Judaism, as I said. But what it yields is the opportunity um, to be part of a community dedicated to values. I mean, community is very hard to come by in the modern world. It's such a precious resource. But when you're kind of committed to the law, then you are committed to Torah observance. Then you are automatically in relationship to a people, and I mean, not a very large people in relation to the number of Christians in the world or Muslims or the like, but you are in relation to a people in a very around yeah you're in relation to a people engaged in a common project. You're in relation to a tradition dating back thousands of years. You can pick up a Talmud and kind of engage in a conversation with people who lived 1,000 years ago and were struggling to understand and to make sense of the very same texts that they're printed now alongside of and that you're reading right now. So yeah, it's and I mean to some extent that kind of sense of peoplehood is available around an ethnic definition by itself, right? If you conceive of yourself, if you think of yourself as French, then you are kind of bound to this imagined community of French people who kind of share a common language, common cuisine, etc. Um, but to me, kind of the what you're getting in is a much more sort of dense form of that and oriented toward ultimate values because it's not just ethnic, it's also religious. It has this tremendous, extremely thick history and set of texts and practices.
So I asked that as kind of a backdoor way of getting to,
Yeah.
again, but I think a more specific way to say something I was talking about earlier is a lot of a lot of Christians understand the like the meta narrative, a theological meta narrative, beginning as you are bad, the world is bad, and and Torah was an attempt to mitigate that badness. But it sounds like what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that Torah is rather an invitation to participate in something else. It it is not a remedy necessarily for all the world's ills, but it's an identity marker. It's so many things. Is that does that make
Hmm.
sense?
Yeah, yeah, sure. And that idea of the Torah as a response um, to something wrong in the world or something fundamentally wrong with human beings. I mean, there is a dimension of that. Judaism kind of recognizes the idea that um, the idea of an evil inclination and a tendency to sin. There's a rabbinic remark about right that God created the evil inclination, but He created the Torah as the medicine to it. So there is that aspect, but Judaism is certainly not kind of fundamentally committed to to the idea of the Torah as a kind of stern pedagogue that keeps you in check. That definitely is not the fundamental or most important understanding of the Torah within Judaism. It's the understanding of the Torah in Judaism is that it's an expression of God's love. Right? God wants to have a relationship with human beings. For whatever reason, and we see something of the logic governing kind of divine providence in the early chapters of Genesis, but God decides to develop this particularly intimate relationship with this one people, and bound up with that um, with that decision, which is a decision to enter into this love relationship with Abraham and his descendants, is to give them the covenant, to enter into a covenant with them, and to give them this law um, as the content of it. So yes, first and foremost, an expression of divine love, not of a the rod, as it were.
That's a fantastic way of putting it. Not that you need my validation, but I really appreciate that you put it that way, because I think, and this goes beyond simply discussing biblical text or theology. I think there is a kind of rotten cynicism with attitudes around law. There is a very an emphasis on retribution, on worthiness,
Mm,
and on unworthiness, and almost this idea that, like, at least to some laws, like if we're in compliance with this law, that'll be good. And it's like, well, what do you mean that'll be good? You're satisfying some, and it's, I think that is because you've mentioned a couple of times in this interview already, Christians
mhm,
are numerically the dominant people. And I think because maybe we have this from the cradle understanding of, like, all this stuff in the Hebrew Bible, man, that's a lot of trouble, because if you think you're good enough, you're not, you're bad, you're
mm,
wrong. And the only parts that we really focused on are the parts that we read Jesus back into. And then going forward, like, stay away from law, stay away from law. And there's this sense that, like, uh, uh, your goodness either doesn't exist or it has to be organic, and that law per se is unhelpful and should be about retribution. And those very same
mhm.
people who will condemn law are really eager to utilize law. And I know that's a bit of a rant. There's no question in there, but do you have any thoughts on that? Do you see that?
Yeah, right. Yeah, for sure. There are those stereotypes, and I think they are very harmful. And I think they're very harmful, and they're certainly incorrect as readings of the law in the Hebrew Bible, and certainly don't correspond to the way Judaism understands the law. That all being said, I think it's important to note that 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 I guess stereotype isn't kind of coming out of nowhere. I mean, there are these New Testament texts that seem to have, anyhow, on their surface, negative things to say about the law, um, and more than that, even. It's I mean, the question of the status of the law is it's a complicated one. I mean, and more generally, within a Christian context, if you think that Jesus has come and is offering something and is doing something new, then it's difficult to see how you can define what that new thing is unless kind of by contrast with the old, and then you're led off in that direction that could lead to what I certainly would agree is um, a misunderstanding of the New Testament texts themselves, and certainly a misrepresentation of anything like Judaism's own view of the law, of Torah.
So since we're kind of on law, and we are getting close to time,
Yeah.
can what is the importance of Sabbath? Can you go into that?
Hmm. Sure. Yeah. So I did devote well a chapter. I think it was ultimately right, a chapter to the Sabbath and the festivals. I mean, right. It's all of the topics that I cover in the book. I can't do quite do justice to them, of course. But I did. Yeah, but I thought it was very important to really devote a lot of space to the Sabbath in the book because it is so central has been so central for Jewish life throughout the ages, and perhaps is never as central as it is now. And that's because the Sabbath is about rest, first and foremost, and traditional Judaism certainly has taken that Sabbath rest to require refraining from most forms of technology or electronics, and so there's such an enormous gap then between how one spends one's ordinary days and how one spends the Sabbath within a traditional framework. So, yeah, I mean, what to say about the Sabbath? I mean, I guess what was it? This was the point in the book that I thought it was helpful uh, to think about rabbinic Judaism, i.e. Judaism as we know it today, more or less, with other forms of Judaism, because you can that existed in the past and to some extent persisted today, because there you can really see through that contrast a kind of concerted effort of the rabbis to insist both that yes, the Sabbath is holy, and that holiness requires a kind of separation from the workday and from our ordinary life, total cessation of work. The Sabbath is kind of temple-like in that respect. It's a temple in time, to use the terminology of Abraham Joshua Heschel. But the rabbis will insist it is also a time for enjoyment. Right? We shouldn't think of ourselves, and this is the metaphor that I was developing in the book. We shouldn't think of ourselves, if the Sabbath is a temple on account of its holiness, we shouldn't think of ourselves on the Sabbath as being in the temple like a priest, because priests can't drink wine because they're right there in the presence of God, and so they can't be drunk. They can't be defiled in any way, which also means that they can't have kind of sexual relationship immediately prior to appearing in the temple, because that would defile them. So they need to be sort of renouncing certain essential features of their incarnate existence, of their bodily existence, because they are in the temple, they are proximate to God. The Sabbath, on the rabbinic understanding, in contrast to some other kind of Jewish interpretations, is not like that. For the rabbis, it's more like you are kind of basking, as it were, in the presence of God, in the shadow of God in the temple, but you're outside the temple. So you can drink. In fact, you're supposed to be drinking wine as part of sanctifying the Sabbath, the blessing to sanctify the Sabbath. Sexual intercourse is permitted. In fact, within the rabbinic tradition, that is kind of the ideal time for sexual intercourse, Friday night, marking from when Sabbath begins and Friday evening into Saturday night. And so it is really the rabbinic Sabbath is an experience that really insists the um, on the idea that human beings are at once kind of called to imitate God and be in relation to God, and then on the other hand are human beings, meaning they're embodied, unlike God, right? Because Judaism rejects the idea of incarnation, so they're fundamentally unlike God. And the Sabbath is the fullest realization of human beings as human beings. So they're both dimensions.
And it also seems kind of subversive to a lot of the power and demands that could be extractive of human labor, human time, human attention. I mean, you mentioned technology, but
Hmm.
I think there's a certain amount of if you go into the world with a again a meta narrative of like a rugged individual, like, well,
Hmm.
how you can't tell people how productive they can be, but what really ends up happening is someone else demands of you that like every second, every cubic centimeter of space and resources needs to be devoted to developing wealth, and this really does kind of stand as a bulwark against that, don't you think?
Yeah, no, it is pretty amazing that way. And yeah, I mean it relativizes the pursuit of wealth. That is not the ultimate goal. I mean, I think about there's an analogy, a kind of a structural analogy between the Sabbath and the sabbatical year. And right, so the Sabbath comes every 7 days, the sabbatical year comes every 7 years. It was largely kind of moot for most of the last couple of millennia, but now the observance of the sabbatical law is a robust thing in the modern state of Israel, um, because it's a matter specifically of the land of Israel, the Holy Land. But I mention it because in the Bible, in Leviticus, quite explicitly, the logic of the sabbatical year is you don't work the land during the sabbatical year, uh, uh, as to indicate that the land is not yours. The land fundamentally belongs to God, and it is yours as a gift. And when recognized as a gift, when you recognize it and the pursuit of prosperity through cultivation of the land as secondary to, as index to a relationship to God. And yeah, I think that's a very, very important part of Sabbath observance, to relativize the pursuit of wealth, the accumulation of wealth, as important as material prosperity is. The Jewish tradition doesn't is not kind of fundamentally ascetic, but the Sabbath does establish a set of priorities.
I think right now, with the word waste being used as much as it
Hmm.
is in the public discourse, and for those of you in the future, just Google 2025 news, but the word waste is being used so much. And I really
Yes.
do wish that we would reframe our concern, not to completely eliminate a concern for waste in the terms of profligacy, but
Hmm.
waste in terms of the effect that it has on people. I had really hoped that COVID would teach us, when you're sick, don't go around people. Don't take communicable diseases to other people. But our culture of work and our fear of certain kinds of waste, uh, I think, are at least in part a contribution to us ending up wasting ourselves away, um, because we're afraid of power ultimately. But you don't have,
Hmm.
if you don't have any thoughts on
Yeah,
that, that's
yeah,
fine.
yeah. No, no, no. I mean, I think that's a interesting. A powerful diagnosis. No pun intended of the of COVID and its and our responses to it. Um, yeah, yeah. It right, in a certain sense, right. It has that. It has that satisfying quality to it. For those who want to who have the eyes to see, as it were.
Oh, um, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry to wax all, I guess, political there. I try to keep it as broad as I could.
Seems almost inevitable. How can one avoid
What, and there are plenty of things, and I acknowledge this in almost every interview. I like to just follow where you guys go. So whatever you
it?
say that brings a thought into my head, I try to follow that. What were
Yeah.
you hoping I would ask about from the book that I failed to ask about?
Oh, yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, so yeah, well, let's see. I mean, yeah, I think, I mean, I guess the only part of the book, I mean, you mentioned, uh, when one needs to tread lightly around politics. And I guess the only, I guess, section of the book maybe that we didn't
You
touch
don't
on
need
at
to. I
length.
will.
Oh,
I'll
okay,
tread
yeah.
lightly. You say
Well,
whatever you want.
the final. Well, I mean, it's just that the final two chapters are about the question of Zionism and the state of Israel. And I mean, I mentioned Israel in terms of demographics, and you mentioned also Christian Zionism as part of your background, so that was coming up kind of incidentally. But and these were difficult chapters to write because, well, because it's such a sensitive topic in our public discourse generally, for Jewish-Christian relations specifically. I don't. This is a book about theology, so I'm not. The aim of those chapters is not to describe or comment on political circumstances narrowly, but to consider the theological dimensions. What are the what were theological responses to the emergence of Zionism in the 19th century among Jews and among Christians? What's the theological background to Zionism? What are the implications for Jewish religious practice of the emergence of the state of Israel? How do we think about war and peace from or the exercise of Jewish power from the perspective of Judaism, from the perspectives of Christianity? So yeah, those were the kinds of the sets of questions that I was dealing with there. And I'm not unhappy that you didn't ask about it because it is so difficult. I felt like I wrote and rewrote those chapters, especially rewriting them in the aftermath of October 7th and the subsequent war. Thinking about how a particular sentence or paragraph would be received now as opposed to 12 months before. Um, yeah, it's tricky. It's very tricky to do to I guess treat the subject with the complexity that it deserves. Which is not to say that everything is complex. So, for example, the idea that the land of Israel is a fundamental category in Jewish theology, that's a pretty straightforward thing. That's just a matter of kind of conveying certain things that need to be said. But on a number of other kind of topics, there's just a lot of complexity, and so it was nice to have an opportunity to do it in writing, where one could kind of weigh every word. Not that I'm totally comfortable with what came out, but um, one needs to stop somewhere.
There's still ink in the world, so
That's
there's no
right.
reason there's no reason you can't write more. And there's
Fair
digital
enough.
ink. Well, I don't know that we'll ever
Ah.
run out of digital ink. So I'll say, by way of, I don't know, defense or explanation, those aren't things that I brought up, and I wasn't intentionally avoiding them. But a bigger concern for me is people who don't have an understanding of Judaism, developing an
Hmm.
understanding and knowledge base of what Judaism is. You can
Yeah,
go
I think that's great.
to any number of places to hear about Zionism, and most of those are going to come with a lot of extra stuff, I think, one way or
Yeah.
the other. And I think for a country in the United States, which is primarily where my audience is,
Hmm.
insofar as they exist, but for a country like the United States, and for people like Christians, to kind of reverse engineer your understanding of Judaism based on Christianity is not acceptable, and it leads there's a reason that there's a spike in visible. I'll add the qualifier visible anti-Semitism, and it's because it's
Hmm.
always been there. And I'm
Hmm.
sure listeners may be tired of me, but I brought this up way back since John D. Levinson was on. When someone says Rothschild space lasers, and everyone else says that person is saying something anti-Semitic, and that person probably does not understand themselves to be doing that. That is an example of how pervasive anti-Semitism is. And so the
Hmm.
knowledge of what Judaism is, what and who the Jewish people are, and what what is the result of Torah observance or of being Jewish, as set Christianity aside and trying to develop an understanding of that. So yes, read the book. Absolutely, there's a
Hmm.
copyright. Read the book. Learn about all of those things. Uh, there's a significant amount of time spent on the Apostle Paul, but I wanted to hear positive assertions of Judaism is X rather than Judaism
Hmm.
is not Y. So, yeah,
Yeah,
no.
I
If
appreciate
I'll
that.
fully take the blame that more of the book didn't get brought up in that regard, but
I know, I appreciate it. I think that's, I think that kind of emphasis would be a very, very, healthy intervention in our current climate. So yeah, I really appreciate that.
so other than your book, Judaism, a guide for Christians, other than your book, what would you, where would you direct listeners to read, listen, watch? I mean, obviously this
Um,
podcast, but they're already here.
right, right. Well, yeah, I mean, so it's interesting, right? There are podcasts actually, or there are great podcasts about Judaism. Maybe I'll mention the podcast 1840. It's a very interesting treatment of contemporary Judaism. And each of these, I mean, obviously every podcast is coming from its own perspective. That one. Kind of coming from an Orthodox framework. Um, then there's a kind of more liberal kind of range of American Judaism. So there's a podcast, Judaism Unbound. Um, so there are podcasts. I think for your audience, I mean, and in particular, kind of giving a robust conception of what Judaism is in its own terms. There's a recent book by Shai Held which I reference in the book. Judaism is about love, and he's a really really thoughtful theologian, and that book is very much emerging from conversations with Christians, um, and seeking to help them understand, yeah, kind of what Judaism is from the inside and the way in which that differs so kind of so starkly
If I may jump
from
in
Jewish
on that
versions.
point, there's
Please,
an
yeah.
episode, and I'll link it in the show notes. But there's an episode he did of On Script talking about that book. So if you don't have time to
Oh,
go read
yeah,
the
great,
book,
great.
that was a really good interview.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So that's excellent. And yeah, I th the visual medium, movies, series are great in this course that I teach. I've shown that's kind of the background to the book. I've shown clips from Surgim, which is this neat Israeli series. At least as of a few months ago, I think it was still available on Amazon Prime, but these things change. But describing it's kind of an Israeli Friends kind of sort of scenario, 20 somethings, it, within a modern Orthodox context. So you get kind of lived traditional life there, modern, but also traditional, and kind of, yeah, the insights that you don't get unless you're just kind of hanging out with someone, and seeing what this looks like as a lived set of commitments. There's also another Israeli uh, show coming from an ultra-Orthodox context, Shtisel, which is just very, very well done, and very engaging characters. And then also along the way, it kind of takes you for a really, a lot of kind of depictions, especially of, well, you can go with kind of uh, uh, depictions in film of depictions of Jews in film can be either sort of kitschy and kind of culturally Jewish, bagels and lox kind of focus and Jewish humor, and that can be fun, and Seinfeld like, but you're not getting much Jewish religious content there, and then it can get sometimes reductive or uh, uh, in representing more traditional life. But Stiesel kind of threads the needle there, a very sympathetic but honest portrait of ultra-Orthodox Judaism and the beauty of that life, the constraints of that life. So that's another series I'd recommend.
I didn't expect that there was like an Orthodox Friends, but
Oh
that
yeah,
sounds
yeah, yeah. No,
interesting.
it's great. It's great. Yeah. Oh no, it's great. It's just fun. Yeah, yeah. Binge watch it. Yeah.
Okay, so those will be in the show notes.
Okay.
So, what do you read for fun?
What do I read for fun? Well, yeah. I don't read much in terms of novels. I do read Torah for fun. Reading or studying Torah is kind of part of my job in the sense of, approaching it from an academic perspective, from an historical perspective. But it's also part of what I do for fun. I have a regular, weekly chavruta, kind of a study partner, whom I study a particular text by a well-known kind of rabbi of the 20th century, Rabbi Yitzhak Hutner, an amazing thinker. So that's a fun thing to do. And also kind of uh, read read poetry that's kind of not immediately connected to Judaism, but a big fan of English poetry broadly.
Any poetry recommendations?
Wallace Stevens is I probably rank as my favorite poet. Just an amazing sense of language and yeah, an amazing capacity to express uh, kind of the power and paradoxes of human imagination. So Wallace Stevens is my recommendation.
I don't know if you need to hear this. And you know what? This you is a plural you, because I've never seen people look like they feel more judged. And I ask that question pretty much at the end of every episode. What do you read for fun? Then academics who really enjoy
It's
what they
true.
do for a living, who get asked, hey, what do you read for fun? And they're like, oh, now I have to level with this person that I really enjoy what I do. There is nothing wrong. If that's
I
what you
mean,
enjoy, it's what you
yeah,
enjoy.
it's an absolute. I really. I often kind of, get caught up in small annoyances, but I do pride myself on also often kind of just stepping back and appreciating the immense privilege to be doing what I do as a career. Yeah, I love it.
What else do you do to decompress?
Oh, I mean, exercising. I mean, family. I've got four kids, and love spending time with them, and then hanging out with them and with my wife. And so, yeah, that's yeah. Any opportunity that I can do that is just a joy too. I mean, it's can have its complications and challenges too, in the usual respects, but that's a great thing. And yeah, I mentioned Seinfeld. I don't watch Seinfeld for Jewish content, but I do watch Seinfeld. So, yeah. Yeah, I appreciate classic sitcoms of the 90s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s.
Okay. Well, I really appreciate you sitting down with me today. So unless you have anything else for us, I'm going to call this one
No,
good.
that's great. I appreciate the conversation.
Okay. Thank you. Tzvi Novick. Take care.
Bye bye.
Thank you so much for listening. Once again, I really encourage you to pick up the book, Judaism, A Guide for Christians by Tzvi Novick. I think whether you feel like you know a lot about Judaism or not, this is a good book to have in your library, and it's an even better book to have read. That said, next week, we're shifting back to articles, which is what most of the interviews on this podcast are. But while we're not going to be staying in the realm of Judaism, we are going to be in Hebrew Bible. I will be discussing I'll be talking with Reed Carlson about his article, Spirit Possession and Intimate Partner Violence. So here's a quick preview of that. And if you get a chance to love someone, you should take it. Take care.
So this is a law. It's presented as a prescription for a particular ritual that Israel is supposed to do whenever a husband is overcome by a spirit of jealousy. That's what it says in the Hebrew. And that phrase, overcome by a spirit of jealousy, it occurs once at the beginning and once at the end. Many translations will just say something like, if the husband feels jealous or something like that, but literally it's described in this particular way. Maybe we can talk about that a little bit later, whether they're to read it idiomatically or not. In any case, the jealousy emerges when the husband suspects that his wife has been unfaithful, but does not have proof according to the particular demands of proof, perhaps with reference to other parts of the Torah. And so it prescribes a ritual wherein he is supposed to bring his wife to the shrine, to the priest, and they have to do a kind of particular ritual. It involves bringing a grain offering, and I'm grabbing my Bible here. Bring the offering, this is verse 15. He shall bring the offering required for her, 1/10 of an ephah of barley flour. He shall pour no oil in it and put no frankincense on it. For it is a grain offering of jealousy, a grain offering of remembrance, bringing iniquity to remembrance. So then the priest comes, approaches the presence of God and takes holy water in an earthen vessel and also some of the dirt or the dust that's on the floor of the tabernacle and puts it into the water. And then in verse 18, the priest presents the woman before God, and then it messes up her hair, and then places her hands in the grain offering, and it's called the grain offering of jealousy. And then he takes this water, it's called the water of bitterness that brings the curse. And then he makes her say an oath, basically swearing that she has not been unfaithful. And then he also says kind of the curse, this is what will happen if you are lying.